Hey guys, welcome to this first class of aud205. We're going to start in Adobe Premiere today with a simple edit project. We got this from our friends at Hootenanny, and there's a countdown, a 2-pop, and then some footage for us to work on. This is kind of a typical editing project, I would say. There's probably going to be more layers of video, but we don't really need to worry about that. But there's a couple layers of audio from a recording on location with some sound effects down here, location sound effects. What we're going to do is we're going to prep this for audio. So if you ever need to help your editor out, this is a good kind of walkthrough for that. So within a typical editing scenario here, you have heads and tails on the audio. So if you wanted to create a audio transition, such as a crossfade, you have heads and tails to do that. It actually extends the heads of this audio clip out and then extends the tail of this audio clip out so that there's enough audio for transitions. So we want to maintain that going into our editing software, our audio editing software, because we're going to want not only heads and tails to do crossfades, but we also want to sometimes find a snippet of audio that might be after the clip here for noise removal as well. So I'm just going to do that. So we're going to do that crossfade. So we're going to export out our video. We're in media. We're going to change a couple things here to make Audition run a little smoother. I like to use the ProRes 422 LT codec. In here, I turn the gamma correction to none so that color doesn't get messed up. I know this is 23976, and audio we can do uncompressed. 16-bit is fine. We're going to save this out to a location. So I'm going to call this our goodbyes work pick. I'm going to save this to the root level of this class and then hit export. Okay, now that that's done, we're going to create an OMF file. The OMF file is essentially this whole sequence encapsulated in a file. I'll show you that more in depth in Audition, but it'll give us the heads and tails of the clip and then also kind of rebuild this edit for us in one file. It's really nice. So we're going to go export OMF. And then you can also do AAF as well. AAF and OMF are essentially the same thing in theory, but OMFs are a little bit more universally accepted. And certainly that's how we got to get into Audition. So we're going to call this goodbyes. 16-bit encapsulated just means it's going to be one file, not separate files. If you think of an XML where you have an EDL or an XML, and then all the individual audio files in a folder encapsulated is we're going to create one OMF file. And then this has already been consolidated, but if you wanted to trim it down from its, if each of these clips were 5 minutes long, you can trim it down to, say, 120 frame handles. I think this is already at 200, so I'm just going to, I'll leave it there. So hit export. This is going to go into the same folder. Hit save. This process takes a minute. Okay. Then we get a report that just says everything worked out okay. Click OK, and then we're going to close out of Premiere. Boot up. And this is the kind of default with no projects loaded. We're going to import our OMF file. So import file. We're going to go find our OMF file here. Say open. And then it's going to ask us where to extract the encapsulated media from the OMF. So we're going to call it goodbye audio. Let's say choose. Now we have our edits, and so like I was showing you in Premiere, you can extend out the audio of each of these edit points, which is really handy. So now we need to load in our picture, so we're going to import file, and grab our work picture. So that dropped in pretty quick, so we're gonna load it in. There's a 2-pop here that we need to line up. So the 2-pop is our point of reference for audio going between audio workstations and back to the editing system. So this has been the standard for a long time, and it will remain so. All right, so we got our picture lined up to the 2, so that the pop happens at the 2. And so I added a stereo track. So we're going to drop in our stereo audio from the work picture as well. This is a good way to reference against what came in with a QuickTime against what the OMF had. And sometimes if there was a problem with a file, you can see a missing gap here. But as you can see, it lines up pretty well with what we got from the OMF matches what we got from the picture. Disable this clip so that you don't, you can mute this clip so it doesn't interfere with what you're doing, and you can make this track a little smaller so it kind of tucks out of the way. I like to do that with the picture as well, just to kind of get out of the way. Now we know that the picture's down here, and it'll follow whatever you're going to do, just like a standard editing system. So now, as far as organization goes, I like to give myself some working room. So I'm going to add a few extra tracks for music. So if we had some music in this, you know, we can, if it didn't come in with the OMF, you know, you can make some tracks for music, and then you can make some tracks for sound effects. There's a shortcut for add tracks. I think it's Option A. Hold on, Option A if you're on a Mac. I think it's Alt A on a PC. So then we're gonna create sound effects 1, sound effects 2, sound effects 3. All right. So now we got some tracks. Then I like to add some bus tracks, which are essentially groups. So there's a little handle here. You can move tracks around. We'll call this bus A voice. We're going to make a couple more. There's a shortcut as well. It's Option B for bus. So we got voice, sync, scroll down, call it 2 more. Music and SFX. So these now we want to route out to our bus. So our voice tracks here, or sync tracks rather, are these guys. And so if you mouse wheel down and up inside of this track here, it expands and contracts the audio tracks. It's kind of a quick shortcut if you need to get to things that are hidden by size, and the output routing is hidden typically. So instead of routing it to the master, I want to route my voice sync audio to sync. The voice I keep for voiceover. This is actually a location sound effect, and I'll show you more of that in a minute. And then music is going to go out to music. Sound effects, and sound effects. So now I got everything grouped. Probably move the music up to here, and then rename this fountain left. And okay, so now we got our project pretty well organized. It's a lot of extra tracks, but I'll show you why this is helpful. There are a number of ways to affect audio in Audition, and one way is to do a track effect. So track effects under your effects rack, these are plugins that you can add into your track effects here for EQ or compression or reverb or noise reduction, all kinds of different stuff. And we'll get into that more as the course goes on. But for instance, if we wanted to add, just to this track, we wanted to add a parametric equalizer and roll off some of the highs and clean up some of the bottom. This is a pretty easy way to clean up the track pretty quickly. So now we have this track here, just this top track being affected. But before I do that, I want to show you a trick. So if you're suspecting that the top track and the bottom track are the same exact audio, and you don't know if you should work with both of them or with just one or the other, a lot of times you'll get two microphones on two different tracks, and so you can edit between the two. But if you're suspecting that the top track and the bottom track are the same, there's this little polarity reverse or phase reverse checkbox, and if you play them, and now you look at your sync mix bus, there's nothing coming out and there's nothing coming out the mix here. And I'll let that play through. I also suspect it down here. I'm going to mute these sound effects. So if I play through, if they're phase canceling each other out, then that means they're identical. So if I turn off phase and I get audio now, then sure enough, these are the same, and I can very easily, with confidence, delete one. So then that frees me up to start checkerboarding the clips for different processing, or for if I have two different people, then I can separate them out and affect them separately. Another way to do that would be, if you want to keep a separate copy of it, you can copy this down and just mute the clips. That way you're not getting rid of them, and if you over process one, you can always get back to another copy here. You can easily just add another track, add a mono track, and route this out the sync bus, and then you can do your checkerboarding here, stuff like that. Okay, another quick tip. Crossfades are pretty much your friend all the time, so transitioning between location audio clips, it generally makes sense to do a crossfade between the two. You can either do it this way, or if you have a preference set up, it'll automatically crossfade any overlap clips. So that's a pretty good segue. Let's look at some of the preferences. If you go to preferences, there are a couple of key things I want to show you. First of all, if you have separate audio hardware set up, you can change your input and output device. I have a Mo2 ultralight. Yeah, if you're on a Mac, you have the built-in output that goes to your headphones or your speakers, and that's a great way to work. Otherwise, if you have another core audio-based sound card, it should show up in here once you install the drivers, and then kind of work from there. The channel mapping, this is where your outputs go. So if you have a 5.1 setup, like I do here under Mode 2, you can go to channel mappings. Actually, my left and right are on the left and right outputs. So left, right, center. Change this to center, LFE, left surround, right surround. So now anything that's feeding a 5.1 output is going to go to the speakers correctly, or at least the channel mappings correctly. Media and disk cache, this, if you drop in R3D footage or other things that are typically unsupported, this dynamic link media support is going to basically play back anything that Premiere plays back. So this will enhance the video playback capabilities of Audition. Down under time display, since we're working with video, I like to work in the SMPTE time bar. You can also change this up here by right-clicking in the time bar. All right, so now we have our project set up pretty well. There are a couple things that I can show you here. So if you highlight a clip, you click on Properties, this is going to give you a few more options as far as what to do with it. And even if you highlight multiple clips here, go to Properties. Let's say we wanted to make all of our voice a different color. You can change that to blue, for instance, here. And that might make it more helpful to make all of our sound effects yellow. So now when we are scrolling up and down our project, we can very quickly see what kind of area we're in. Also in this properties section, you have clip gain, which is really helpful. And If you wanted to increase the volume of this clip here, you could very easily just walk over here and say I want it 12 dB hotter. You could also highlight the whole group of clips and change it to be 12 dB hotter. Now, a thing to remember is that when you do that, our original clip was not, it's not additive gain, it's just change gain. So if you had 6 dB here and 8 dB here and 10 dB here, and now you highlight this whole group and you say, you know what, this whole group needs to be 6. If you punch that into this little window, all of them are going to be 6 now. So just be careful how much you have selected when you go through there. It's a really handy mix tool. Okay. Okay, so I also suspect that our fountain sound here, our left and our right, is the same sound. So you can phase reverse the one side, and if it does clear out, it goes away, then you know that you're dealing with the same audio.
You see, champ, sometimes in life, opportunities come by that,
if we mute the voiceover track,
good.
now we know that the two are the same. So clean this up. Just call this fountain. Otherwise, if it was separate, then I would pan one side left and pan the other side right if it's a stereo. If it's dual mono. In this case, I can actually remove this track. So if we want to get rid of a track, go up to multi-track, track, and delete selected track. Okay. So I'm not going to show you anything with sound effects and music right now, but if we were happy with our mix here and everything was great, and we're ready to export to go back to Premiere. Now, if you go to export and you go to multi-track and see how this time selection is grayed out. That's because we haven't set an in and an out point yet. If you did this, it would be everything that's encompassed by this top bar up here. So our entire session. So everything in and out. Now, if you had a session that went for an hour long, you could potentially render out an hour's worth of audio when all you really want is this minute plus piece of your session. So to do that, I will start right at the 2-pop, which is at 3 seconds, and I like to type it in so that it's right at the start of the file. And so if you type in 0300, it's going to move you to the 2-pop here. And if you hit the keyboard key I, it's going to mark an in point. So then we'll come down to the end of the clip, the end of the video. So to zoom in and zoom out, you use the plus and minus key. I'm just going to get in a little closer to make sure the out is right at the end of the video.
Press O to set your out point.
So now when we go to File, Export, Audio Mixdown, the time selection is available. We click Time Selection. This is where you set up all your export parameters. We're going to want to put it in the same folder that we were dealing with, which is in Projects. It's PhD Class 1. We're going to call this Goodbyes Mix. I'll typically put the date at the front. So then we're going to change this to AIF since we're on a Mac. We're going to say save. We have a couple options. You can change the format here as well. There's a few different codecs available. You can go to MP3. You can go to an audio-only QuickTime, WAV, obviously. These aug files are usually for either web or phone systems like them. Some video game people use aug files as well. FLAC is kind of a new format for people sharing music. It's a lossless compressed codec, but AIF, WAV, and MP3 will probably be your main choices here. We're going to look at sample types. I'm going to downres this to 16-bit. So then you go, okay, we're going to look at 16-bit. This is for Intel. This is where you can pick the source of where you want to come from. So in our case, we want the stereo mix off the master. And then you could also choose your individual tracks, but we don't want to do that in this case. And then this is also handy for batch exporting. You could do voice, sync music, and sound effects as well. So that's partially why we set up those buses. So now we're going to export. It's only going to take a second or two. Now we're going to go back to Premiere and load in our file. Of course, we're going to save it. Launch our project. So now you can see why having the 2-pop is important, because now we can park on our 2-pop and we can go to load in our mix, which will be Goodbye's mix. Here we go. So we're going to import that. Now, so we're going to add a new track. We're going to make a standard track. Drop our mix on it. So now we have a stereo mix. And you can either turn off the speaker for these 2 tracks, or you can mute all these clips. So you go disable. Now you have your original audio in your session, but now the only thing coming out is your mixed audio from channel 4 here. Obviously, we didn't do any mixing to it. I'm just showing you how to get things in and out. So now when you render it out, you have your 2-pop lined up and your mix. Another easy way to check it is if you turn everything on. You can do a phase comparison. So
hey guys,
if you play back the original with the mix, they should phase pretty closely to each other, if not 100%. So that's an easy way to
where's Brooks?
Double check your work. All right, so we'll go back to Audition and look at a couple other things. All right, so now that we know how to get things in and out of Premiere, I want to take a few minutes to look at levels and metering. Audition has this built-in meter down here, which is a DBFS full-scale meter. When we talk about full-scale, the range that it looks at is going to be all the way up to digital 0, which is right here. All right, so this meter down here, I like to set the range to about 48 dB or even 24 dB. In this example, we'll use the shorter range here, the 24 dB range. The dynamic peaks is going to kind of reset after about 3 seconds or so, 2 or 3 seconds. Static peaks are going to keep the peaks wherever the topmost value ever arrived at. So in this first example, this is a clip here. It's a smack sound effect, and I'm just going to show it to you because it's very transient. So here it comes. So we registered about -3.5 or so decibels. This next clip is a music track, and it's going to come in hopefully around the same place. All right, and then the last clip is going to be a machine gun fire sound, and here it comes. Okay, so when you're looking at digital audio, it's helpful to at least see what the maximum value is so that you're not clipping into the red. If you were clipping, then the top values are just getting rounded off or squared off, and that's where digital distortion can happen. But this meter doesn't really give you a good idea for the loudness or the average sound level. So to look at that, we need a different meter. And I'm going to insert on our master here, on the track effects, I'm going to insert a plugin by Voxango called Span. And this one will show you, in this mode, is exactly the same as down here. So let me show you that. So they look very similar. If I switch this one over to the K20, the K dash stands for Bobcat, and he's a mastering engineer, and he developed an RMS meter, a root mean square meter, which is basically an average meter. So the 20, the 14, and the 12 all have the same ballistics, but what they do is they reset where the 0 marker is. So at a K20, the 0 is at minus 20 dBFS, the K14 at 0 to 14, and then the K12 is 0 to 12. So the K20 meter is useful for large theater, home theater type stuff, something with wide dynamic range music, could be classical music. The K14 is more for pop music, and then the K12 is intended for broadcast. Here's our slaps again. Now you can see that the average intensity was well below 0 in that. I'll show you that again. Even though our peak was at -3, our average was somewhere around minus 3 here on the K20 system. Our next track is that music track. So we're hitting +4, +5, somewhere in there. And then our gunshot. So that was hitting +10, +11. So that just kind of quickly shows you the difference between peak and average. Showing the peak in the dBFS meter doesn't always show you how loud a clip really is. Okay, so then we got peak, dBFS, and K20. All right, so since we know that peak doesn't always show you what the average volume is, before we had digital meters, we had, at least in the US, we used the VU meter. The VU meter is it's an analog meter that 0 is the reference point, and for a long time we've been mixing on broadcast to +2, +3, +4 as kind of the limit. This translates over to your analog equipment. This translates over to the analog transmitters on the tower. If you mixed it right initially to this meter, then it would translate across all the other equipment, and then it would broadcast without being limited or anything like that. Now this meter is relatively slow. It takes into account about a 300 millisecond rise time. So something such as this click is not going to register as a lot of energy. So let me play that for you. So you can see, since this sound happened below the 300 millisecond rise time, it didn't really register too much on the VU meter. Now this next piece, this music, has more constant energy throughout, and so we'd expect that to show more on this meter. And then our machine gun sound goes right over the top. Okay, so for comparison's sake, I'm going to bring up the K20 meter, which has a reference at -20 dBFS equals 0 K20, and then also -20 dBFS equals 0 VU, just so you can see the difference between the two ballistics. So if we had the VU meter in the US, what did Europe have? Well, Europe used the PPM system. So let me load that up for you. So then what the PPM meter did was they basically set an upper limit on the peaks and said program should be about 5 on the PPM and shouldn't go above 6. And this just kind of gave a reference, but this meter has completely different ballistics than the others as well. So let me play this back for you. And these are just 3 different examples again. So the PPM meter it's a peak program meter, and it's sometimes referred to as a Type 2 PPM. Okay, now we have the US Spec VU meter, the British UK PPM. And these two have been the standard for a really long time. And so now that we have digital broadcasting equipment, the range, we're not limited by the analog equipment anymore. And so mixers that were mixing TV shows wanted to use more dynamic range in their shows. So they started mixing television programs quieter so that on average, so that they had more room dynamically to create explosions or big musical moments, stuff like that. So then when you would cut to commercial, the commercial would still be really loud. So the International Telecommunication Union came up with a new standard, the BS 1770, which both advertisers and show program mixers now conform to the same meter, essentially. And in the U.S., we use the Advanced Telecommunications Systems Committee's A85 standard, which is available through the Waves plugin, the WLM meter, and you can load up the Advanced Telecommunications Systems Committee's A85 standard, and that is going to essentially give you the LKFS meter. Now, they've determined that whether it's program or advertising, everything should be minus 24 plus or minus 2. And so how the meter works is if you play your media through it, you can reset the meter before your program, and then you play across it. So obviously these would be way too loud for broadcast. I can turn it down to get a little closer to what it should be. Let's try this. So this little click music machine gun commercial, which is amazing and awesome, would actually pass and be airable at these levels. A lot of broadcasters are still requesting to limit to minus 8 or minus 10 dBFS or dB true peak, even though that's not part of the ITU standard at this point. So, okay, so then our friends at the EBU came up with a similar standard, and they came up with the LUFS, and it's actually derived off of the ITU BS 1770 specification. And it's going to come in relatively similar as far as levels go. Their specification calls for minus 23 plus or minus 1. So here comes the same minus 24 mix LKFS through a LUFS meter. So we arrived at the same number on a different meter, but their standard is for minus 23. How did we arrive at these LKFS, LUFS numbers? Well, Dolby did a lot of work when they developed Dolby Digital to derive a dialogue norm number so that when they author a movie in a theater, they know, relatively speaking, where's the dialogue in the film set. And so when they wanted to develop that standard for broadcast, they created the LM100 meter, which is an LEQA meter. And that LEQA was the first loudness meter that we had in broadcast before the recent LKFS and LUFS meters. So the LEQA meter behaves the exact same way. You play the content through it, and then at the end you get a number. So here comes LEQA. So there you go. So the only other exception to the rule at this point is the LEQM meter, which is the TASA, the Trailer Audio Standards Association. They developed their own meter, the LEQM meter, to account for different annoyance levels. And so when you go see a movie, you know, you're less annoyed when a big bass hit happens and it shakes the room compared to a loud shrieking sound. They also account for the whole length of the program. Their standard right now is a value of 85 for the long term. I want to show you this Prometheus trailer. They saved a lot of their long-term energy by keeping the trailer relatively quiet through the beginning part, so that at the end they could use up the rest of their loudness energy, so to speak, with the big finale. So here it comes.
A king has his reign. And then he dies. It's inevitable.
Prometheus has landed.
These are ancient civilizations that were separated by centuries, and yet this same pictogram was discovered in every one of them.
They're smiling.
I think they want us to come and find them.
We're all here because of a map you two kids found in a cave.
Not a map. An invitation.
From whom?
Please tell me you can read that.
Prometheus, are you seeing this?
Whatever that probe is picking up, it's reading life form.
What do you mean a life form?
Oh, the head. They're changing.
Changing into what?
It's moving? These things moving?
What is that?
There's a ship.
They're leaving.
To go where?
Earth.
We were so wrong. Take us home! If you don't stop it, there won't be any home to go back to.
Why is that door open? Cut it off! Cut it off!
Big things have small beginnings.
So you can see that they had an overall number of 83, but it never went above 84. And the upper limit for trailers right now is 85, even though the short term went up to 91. I think that gives you a good example of what they are hoping for with these new standards. Is it gives the mixers a lot of freedom to stay within the boundaries, but still have the creative freedom to do bigger moments or quieter moments within the program, versus mixing to, let's say, a VU meter. Let me get that loaded up for you. And you would play through the same section. Down here, this would just be completely over the top. So if you were mixing to a mag track on a film or an optical track on a film, you don't have this dynamic range available. You have to stick within the 0 dB range or so, because there's just not that dynamic range in that medium. Now that we have a digital medium and we have up to digital 0 essentially, these standards are in place to allow you to take advantage of that dynamic range but still stay within a standard, so that when you go see a trailer, one's not super loud and then one's super quiet and then one's in between. All right, so that's metering. So depending on what your your final deliverable is, there's a meter for it. The web is still the Wild Wild West, as we like to say. I think if you use the K12 system for web, since this is a free meter and you're going to be mixing things for a website or YouTube, you could probably get away pretty well with this. So I want to take the last few minutes here to discuss some of the extra features that we haven't really touched on yet. Inside of Audition, it has this multi-track system, which is what we've been looking at this whole time. But if you wanted to if you wanted to look closer at a specific file, and we'll be using this a lot, come over to the waveform editor. And in the waveform editor, there's this little bar here, and you can bring up, and this is going to show you the spectrograph of, this is time, so this is this moment in time, and this is frequency, so from bass to treble. This right here is actually a representation of all the noise that we have in there that we're going to be dealing with next week. So there's a bunch that you can do in this tool. Part of it is necessary for how the noise reduction application works. If you highlight a range of the noise, you can set under effects, you can set noise reduction, capture noise print. Now, the next time you launch the noise reduction program, it's going to use this selection in the effects. So now when you go to noise reduction, reduce noise, that noise print that we just recorded in is now available here. And this is going to be a big part of the next class, is how to use this to get the maximum results. So then when you apply these effects, they transfer back into your multi-track session here. So like I said, we'll dig a lot deeper into these, the waveform editor as we go, but there's a razor blade tool, which you're probably familiar with. That's how you can make edits within your audio, and then there's the arrow tool for dragging and dropping things, moving them around, adjusting fades, adjusting in and out points. There's the slip tool, so if you want to slide this media within here. And then there's the selection tool, so if you wanted to highlight a range, you can then copy and then you can paste it, and that's a good way to work, or you can highlight a range and delete it. These other tools become available in the waveform editor for highlighting a range or for lassoing a range. Now, something I want you guys to do right away is to go to the Help button, go down to Download Sound Effects and More. This is going to be our sound effects library and music library for the rest of the class. You have to agree with the end user license and agreement. I'll let you read that. And then these are now packages of sound effects that you can use within your projects for free of use. They're actually open rights, which is awesome. So you have music loops, music beds, and then a ton of sound effects. I think there's about 10,000 sound effects in here. So this is a great start to a sound effects library, and it's free. It's all, well, it's included with Adobe Audition. So all I have to do is click and start downloading them. And then what I did was I extracted them into a folder, and then in the media browser, I created shortcuts for the music and for the sound effects. And then when you're looking for an effect, you could come in here and they already grouped them for whatever it is. So if I'm looking for a drone, I can sit here and if you turn on the autoplay button here, you can play through the drones, which is great. From here, then you just drag and drop it into your project and you just keep working. It's awesome. There's the effects rack that we've been working with. There's two different ways to work with it. You can either select a track and then apply an effect to the entire track. So for instance here, since we have this equalizer on this track, any audio that's on this track when it plays through is going to play through this effect. It's not individual to the clips. If you want to affect a clip specifically, you can highlight a clip and then go to Clip Effects, and then this is where you can clean up a specific track, or you can add some reverb to this music, or you can change the pitch of something. There's a bunch of different things you can do to it. So these are also non-destructive. So if you want to apply a deesser to just this clip, you can disable individual effects here, or you can disable the entire clip effects group here. This toggles the entire thing. You can also, you also have a slider here for no effect to full effect. For the track effects, if you apply the reverb, you also have the same wet to dry ratio there as well, and the on-off. You can say whether this is pre-fader or post-fader, and then you can render the effect to the track so it doesn't take up real-time processing on your CPU. Match volume is a very useful tool, but it's actually more of an offline process for you. This is a great way to batch your audio before you get going. So if you get a project with a whole bunch of different volumes on stuff, you can actually drop in a clip in here and then go to your settings, and you can say, okay, I want the total peak, the peak amplitude, I want everything to be -1, so that, you know, I'm kind of normalizing all the audio before I get started, so that if it's quiet, then I have plenty of gain to work with. Another thing that match volume is really useful for is, like we were talking about the LKFS and LUFS, they actually have an LUFS process built into it. So you can go to the ITU BS 1770 that we were talking about before. You can set it to -23 LUFS. You can hit process on this clip, and now this clip is -23 LUFS. And so this is handy if you need to conform to this LUFS standard, but you don't necessarily have the ability to mix your whole program through the meter. You can make sure that it's conforming to the standard. Another way to go about this is to open up the amplitude statistics, and then go to, if you double click on a clip, it's going to open up that file in the waveform editor, and then you can go to amplitude statistics and scan the selection, and now it's going to tell you what the loudness is. Batch process is if you set up a favorite, you can then apply it to a bunch of different clips. So if you know that, you know, this mix we're going to want to do a hard limit at -0.1, then you can apply that, and then you can set up where it's going to export to with what prefix and postfix on the name, and then where it's going to go, and then all the settings for the file. Click OK, and then you hit run, and away it goes. Audition works just like any other Adobe application at this point, so you can drag and drop your windows, you can pop things out, you can make new windows, you know, pretty much everything that you would expect to be able to do if you're coming from Photoshop or Premiere. As far as organization goes, you're pretty well set with the workflow. Last thing I'll show you is the mixer. There's remember how we were routing things out to the different buses? This is a quicker way to do that. You can set up your bus routing here. You can set up your input routing depending on what device you have. You can get to your track effects pretty quickly. You can set up your panning and your overall track gain. There's automation here, so you have your read, write, latch, and touch. There's a track EQ that you can get into and, you know, do some processing there. You have the polarity reverse. Pretty much everything that you would need to get to while you're mixing is in the mixer. So we'll definitely get into more of this as the course goes on, but this is how all this looks. And then the standard editor. If you guys want to try to clean up that OMF and start tackling that before next week, take a stab at it. I'm going to include this goodbye work picture and this OMF in with the class files. And so you guys will have a chance to clean this up and see how far you can get, and then we'll compare notes next week. If you guys have any questions, I will be posting a lot of links in the forums to the different committees and standards committees. And certainly hit me up for any questions that you have. I hope you enjoyed the class, and I will see you next week.